Welcome to today's webinar titled Effective Discipline for Preteens ages 10 to 12. We are thrilled to have Tom Sherman with us today. Tom Sherman currently works with the Military OneSource program, where he has served as a clinical supervisor for 3.5 years. He has also worked with children and adults with mental health and substance use disorders. He also teaches master-level counseling, courses in diversity, ethics, assessment, and internship. Without further delay, I will turn things over to Tom Sherman.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our presentation today. Before we get into the meat of our discussion, I just wanted to go over a brief disclaimer. The appearance of the hyperlinks does not constitute endorsement by the Department of Defense of this website or the information, products, or services contained therein. For other than authorized activities such as military exchanges and morale, welfare, and recreation sites, the Department of Defense does not exercise any editorial control over the information you may find at these locations. Such links are provided consistent with the stated purpose of the Department of Defense sponsored webinar. All right. Again, thank you for joining us. And our objectives for this webinar are to consider the developmental considerations for preteens, maintaining good communication, discipline guidelines, establishing rules and limits, natural and logical consequences, working with other caregivers, special considerations when a parent deploys, and knowing when to seek help. So the overview of what we'll go cover in the next couple slides. The word discipline means to teach. It does not mean to punish or control. And it's important that we kind of set that foundation before we go forward. Punishment is designed to impose a penalty for an offense with a focus on past misdeeds. So it's rear-facing. The behavior occurred, and we're punishing for the behavior that happened. Discipline, on the other hand, is designed to correct and promote positive growth with a focus on future behavior. Discipline comes from a place of caring, whereas punishment often comes from a place of anger. And discipline is designed to help foster feelings of security in the child, whereas punishment can often lead to feelings of fear, guilt, and or hostility. Effective discipline teaches self-control, enhances self-esteem, and teaches respect for others. There's three focuses of discipline: instruction, training, and correction. So instruction, letting the child know what's expected of them. Training, when they don't provide the behavior or they're not quite there, we show them what the expectation is. And then correction. So if they try and aren't successful, we look forward. How can we make sure this behavior happens in the future? Children need caring adults to help them control their behavior. They're not adults yet. They lack some of those self-regulatory mechanisms that we as adults have that keep us functioning in pro-social ways. And effective discipline requires understanding of where the child is developing. So again, not adults, where are they kind of in their process? So developmental considerations for preteens. They're entering puberty, experiencing lots of physical changes and mood swings. A researcher named Eric Erickson looked at kind of the stages that all humans progress through as they hit different developmental milestones. A 10 to 12-year-old is in what he termed industry versus inferiority. At this stage, a child should be learning new skills, and failure to learn new skills risks feeling like they're failures or incompetent. So we need to keep that in mind. Is the child is trying to develop their self-efficacy. They're trying to learn that they can do things in the world. And so our role as the adults in their life is to teach them and support them in that growth. If we're punishing them, we're telling them they're not competent, that they aren't successful, and we're interfering with this developmental stage. So children want to demonstrate competence. A challenge at this stage is they may be in such a hurry to demonstrate they know something they're not stopping to think what the consequences of that behavior is or what the potential outcomes are. So that's why we may see impulsivity in these preteens. It's not necessarily that they're just a knee-jerk reaction. They want to show us that they can do things. They can act like adults. They're trying on the adult shoes, as it were, without having the knowledge of adults of what consequences of their behavior may be. So as an adult, this looks impulsive to us. So again, they're trying to develop their competency, and that means they're going to be highly sensitive to criticism. Criticism makes the child feel less competent. And we want to give our child as many opportunities as possible to demonstrate competency and a sense of responsibility. We want to put them in positions where they can show us that they are growing up, that they can do more things on their own. And that involves trust on our part. We need to, one, trust that they do have the ability to do it, and then two, trust that we can keep them safe if they fail. Because failure is okay. It's what we do with that failure and what they learn from that failure that matters. So it's the picking themselves up and being able to brush themselves off. Okay, we failed. What did we learn? What can we do differently for next time so that we are successful? And last, children at this developmental stage participate in concrete thinking. They're very literal, very straightforward. They view the world in black and white, right and wrong. They lack, again, the shades of gray that we as adults may see in situations. And so sometimes when we discipline them, we'll get that's not fair. Not understanding that there's a rationale behind why they're being disciplined, why they're getting these consequences from that. And part of what we'll talk about today is helping the child learn the reason behind the consequences. So discipline guidelines. That first bullet might come as a surprise to some people. Children want discipline. What discipline does is it provides the child structure and safety to try things, fail, and learn. It allows them to develop that competency, but it also helps them teach about the world and consequences. If the child doesn't understand consequences of their behavior, the world becomes a very unstable place. If I do this, what's the outcome going to be? So, for example, us as adults, if I don't show up to work, I'm likely to get fired. I understand there's a consequence to my behavior because my workplace is going to be consistent in if I don't show up, something's going to happen. And children are looking for the structure, and parents are often the first place that provides that structure. And children may also struggle with the transition between school and home because school tends to be a much more structured situation. And if they don't encounter the same structure at home, they may lose that clear sight of what behaviors are appropriate. What's appropriate at home is usually appropriate for school, with some exceptions. But they're looking for that rigor. They're looking for that boundary to be drawn for them of, I don't have to worry about what the consequences are going to be. I know if I react this way, this will be my consequence. So I can dedicate mental energy to other tasks, not worrying about how's this adult going to respond this time. So, for example, if we punish a child one day for not mowing the lawn, and then another time we mow the lawn for them because it's not worth the fight, the child can learn that sometimes there's a benefit from being non-compliant. Is it's worth the risk because of the lack of stability and consistency of, I had to stay in my room this one time, but this other time, Mom, Dad mowed the lawn for me. So maybe I'll roll the dice and see what response I'm going to get from an adult this time. If every time they don't mow the lawn, they go to their room until they come out and mow it, they know that they can't avoid the behavior, and they also know that how we're going to react to them. We want to remain calm when disciplining. Again, this is usually a difference between discipline and punishment, because we're usually angry when we're punishing. is we're at our wit's end. By remaining calm, we need to remember that children are watching how we react. If we lose our temper through yelling or aggression, it may damage a child's sense of competency or teach them that yelling and aggression is an effective way to resolve issues. Because if they give in when we yell at them or aggressive towards them, they may get in their mind that being aggressive or yelling at us may help them win a future argument. We want to avoid criticism. Again, we're trying to build the child's belief that they can function and make good choices. And we need to be careful not to essentialize the child, because children will test our nerves. They'll pluck and pluck and pluck until, again, we reach the end of our rope. But we need to be careful not to essentialize the child and tell them that they are a bad child. We want to separate the child from behavior. And I did a presentation on conflict resolution with middle school students last week, which will be on the website in a couple weeks, that you may want to look up on how to effectively communicate with children in this age group. But one of the key takeaways is using those I statements, letting the child know how their behavior affects you. I don't appreciate it when you don't mow the lawn because I have to work all day, then come home and do your chores. So focus on the behavior that you're disapproving of and that we want to focus the discipline on. This is the area we want them to learn to do better in. Also, under avoid criticism, we want to avoid name calling, such as telling the child they're stupid or a failure. If a child's not turning their homework, we want to be careful to say, what are you stupid? Don't you get it? That's not going to build their confidence. They're going to be less inclined to try next time because they may start believing what we're telling them. Maybe I am stupid. If I'm stupid, why am I going to try next time? If I'm a failure, if I can't do well, why attempt it? We'll make sure we're propping up the child so that next time they encounter a challenge, they're at least willing to try. Even if they fail, we want them to try and then rebound from that failure. We want to state facts when we're upset with the child. Again, clearly communicate what we're upset about. And let the child know what they're supposed to do, not focus on what they're not supposed to do. So instead of saying, don't do this, don't do that, set the expectation that you expect the child to do well. This is what I expect of you. This is what I want you to do. Because then we're setting them up to live up to our expectations instead of hitting a boundary and putting us in a place we have to punish. You've now crossed the boundary when I told you not to do something. And my limited recourse tends towards punishment versus this is what I expect you to do. The child can then come to us and say, I tried this, it didn't work, or I'm stuck. What can I do next? And so again, we're in that teaching position versus disciplining position. And two, with telling the child what we don't want them to do. Their attention and focus is on staying within boundaries. It's not towards striving towards success. If we tell them what we want them to do, they can focus more on those positive behaviors and not on towing the line and staying within the line. So now, of course, children will overstep their bounds, and we have to establish rules and limits to provide them with that sense of stability we've talked about. So as we touched on, for the child, knowing how we as parents will respond helps the child structure their behavior and better understand our expectations of them. Sorry, I got turned around to my notes. I want to touch on giving rewards and not bribes real quick. The difference between rewards and bribes is rewards are pre-established goalposts, whereas bribes are If you walk with me through the grocery store, we'll get a candy bar at the end. That's incentivizing the child's behavior because the child is already acting out and we're trying to get them in line. Rewards are, the child knows, if they mow, allowance is a good example of a reward. If you mow the lawn, I'll give you your allowance. You'll earn $2. If you do the dishes throughout the week, I'll give you another $1. Rewards are based on that expectation of behavior. Know what I'm looking for, know how you need to respond to get that reward. And the last, we've hit on this several times, is be a good role model. The child's looking towards you on how to manage challenges, manage conflicts, and how you support them. If you're supporting them through their challenges, they're more likely to have faith in their own ability to self-support when they're confronted with challenges. All right, now on to establishing rules and limits. Rules and limits should adjust and recognize the child's development level. The child's moving into a different developmental stage, and the rules and limits that may have made sense for a younger child may not fit for a preteen. It may not be as effective. The child may not respond to those forms of limits as before. So rules and limits that are not age appropriate may increase conflict and non-compliance. If we don't adjust to recognize the child's age, the child is going to push to encourage us to get them to recognize that they have changed. Part of this recognition is involving the child in the discussion about rules and consequences. If we pull the child in and solicit them for what they think is appropriate rules and consequences for the family, they're going to feel valued. There's an adult that they respect asking for their opinion and asking them what they think their level of competence is. What do you think you're able to do? What do you think our rules should be now? Can you stay out a little later? It used to be when the lights came on, you need to come in. You're old enough to tell time. If I give you a watch, do you think we can manage another half an hour, to come in? If you're not in an hour past when the lights come on in the street, what's the consequence going to be? How do you think we should respond? In involving the child in the consequences too, when we as the parent have to implement the consequences, we can reflect to the child, this is what we agreed on. You understood that if you didn't do this, this will be the consequence. Also, through having this conversation with the child, it helps us as parents get a sense of where their ability is through their suggested rules and limits. Children can surprise us with what they'll share their comfort level is. You may think we're going to have this conversation about when do you think it's appropriate to come in, and the child's going to say midnight. Now, sometimes the child will say that, but other times children will, if they've had good structure and discipline in stages leading up to this point, may have a more reasonable approach. They know that midnight's not the most realistic approach. They may say offer the hour, or they may say 2 hours, and we as a parent can renegotiate. That's too late. You need to be in to do your homework before bedtime, or whatever the evening ritual is. So I'll meet you in the middle. I'll say an hour after the lights come on. Doing this negotiation helps the child too, one, recognize that we value their contribution, but also with know that we're kind of watching out for them of, I don't think you're quite there yet. And sometimes with some behavior, it can help us set the steps towards, here's what I need to see from you before we can reach this new limit. So maybe, your current limit is you need to do your homework when you get home from school. Child comes back and says, I want to do it in the hour before bedtime. Okay, so this is a child who maybe has historically had issues with homework. Show me for a month that you can turn in all your homework. And if you can do that, we can then revisit can you do your homework an hour before bedtime or an hour after you come in from playing? So we're also not closing the door when we have some of these negotiations. We're telling the child, again, what our expectations are and what they can do to gain our trust, to gain different rules and limits. And we should be able to offer that when all possible. If it's a reasonable increase of a limit, we should communicate to the child what they need to do to get that increase, to get us to change our behavior. Because they'll develop their self-efficacy, they'll see that they have control over both their behavior and how others react to them. And it's that valuing of them, of they have a stake in their functioning in the family. There is some independence. There's not a complete authoritarian parent-child relationship, which will develop respect between the parent and child. So hammering again on the be consistent. Consistency is key. It creates stability and respect. I want my child to know when I as a parent say something, the child knows that I'm going to do it. Idle threats and consequences that aren't followed through on will encourage the child to test limits. Even when we're tired, it's important to follow through on the rules and limits that we've put in place. Because if we don't, it's going to draw out the conflict. The child's going to basically keep testing the fence for the weak spot. You know, will a parent give in here? Will they give in here? Will they give in here? If I'm consistent, the child will eventually get the sense that no matter where they test our limits, we're going to respond the same way. And in turn, that's going to shape their behavior. They're going to stop testing those limits and get what's within them. So the child's exceeded their limits or rules, and we have to impose a consequence. We, just like the rewards, we want consequences established ahead of time. We want the child to know that if you do this, this will occur. We don't want to be reactionary. So we want consequences to be completed quickly and give the child a chance to try again. Consequences should be near in proximity in time to the event. You know, it's not when we get home, you're going to, in like 3 hours from now, you're going to have to go to your room. We want to be as immediate as possible. So if we're out and the child misbehaves, can we remove them from the situation immediately to time out, regroup, and then come back in again? So the child's being rude at the dinner table. We're out at a nice restaurant. Can I take the child out to the waiting room, lobby, outside? You know, you need to sit out here for 10 minutes, think about what you're doing, and then you can come back and try again. The trying again is key to the competency, is we want the child to have the chance to demonstrate the competency in that situation. So we don't want to completely pull them out where they can't come back and try again. Discipline is also about trying for us as parents to try to avoid punishment when possible and being proactive. We're talking about a 10 to 12-year-old child, so we've spent some time with this child. We want to pay attention to what their warning signs are. Like, do we know when the child reached their threshold, when they're getting ready to become aggressive, when they're getting ready to break down, when they're getting ready to make a scene? If we're paying attention to those signs, can we intervene before the child escalates? Because again, we want this to be a learning experience. Once the child escalates, then we have to react. If we tend to the warning signs before the child escalates, we can both defuse and give the child a chance to demonstrate corrective behavior. So just some types of discipline, you need to look elsewhere. There's lists all over the internet about appropriate discipline for children this age range. Timeouts are still effective. The recommendation is 1 minute for every year of age. And the reason we want timeouts to be excessive is, beyond 10, 12 minutes, this age group we're talking about, the child's going to start getting into imaginative play. So they're not going to be reflecting on what they did to get them a timeout. They're just going to be daydreaming. They're going to be thinking about other things, and the consequence is going to lose its impact. So we do want to constrain timeouts to a reasonable time frame. We want to offer choices. If you don't clean your room, then you can't go out. So the going out is loss of time with friends as a form of discipline. And then, of course, there's the ever-popular loss of privileges with electronics for non-compliance. Loss of TV, loss of phone, loss of video games. With the consequences, it really is kind of figuring out what is, and this is a trade-off to looking on the internet, is these are general tips for discipline versus specific ones. Is you want to know what your child values. What will get them to comply. If your child doesn't really watch TV, taking away TV is probably not going to change their behavior. What is important to your child that if they don't comply and we remove or we add on, so if you don't clean up your room, you're going to need to wash the car or clean the garage in addition to eventually cleaning your room. So it's an add-on instead of a subtraction of taking away time with friends or taking away electronics. And sometimes we have to try multiple discipline consequences until we find one that resonates with our child. So if one doesn't work, that doesn't mean we're disciplining ineffectively. We may have just picked a consequence that didn't resonate with our child. So two types of consequences. Natural consequences. Natural consequences are a natural result of the behavior. An example of this is the child is mean to their friends. And as a consequence of their meanness, the friends no longer want to spend time with them. Another example is the child spends money on trivial things, and when a new video game comes out, they don't have the money for it because they spent their money on trivial things. These consequences are imposed by the parents. So in the first example, they're imposed by the friends. In the second one, they're imposed on themselves because they don't have the funds. This allows the child to own the problem and face the consequences. It will involve some suffering in the short term, but it encourages change in the long term. If the child doesn't have to feel the pain of their choices, they don't learn a lesson. So we want to be careful not to rescue them. If we give the message, you'll just find new friends because if they were real friends, they would have stuck by you. We probably want to communicate to the child, because you were mean, these children no longer want to be your friends. Or, floating alone, like, I'll give you some money so you can buy the video game and you can just pay me back. No, let the child have to resave their allowance, whatever they have to do in order to afford the video game. Let them experience the pain of their consequences. And then when the similar issues come up in the future, they have something to reflect back on. Parents didn't rescue me. I need to think about how to solve this on my own. With the developing of competency of I can resolve this on my own because I didn't solve it last time and I didn't like what the results were. So thinking in the future, here's what I'll do next time. So logical consequences are imposed on the child by the parent, and it's as a result of the child's behavior. So an example of that is if a child doesn't help with family chores, which is their job, they do not get allowance. They're not getting paid from their boss, which is you as the parent. And so the consequence should be logically related to the behavior. If you don't do your job, you don't get paid. It's a straight A to B comparison. It makes the child accountable for their choices and behaviors. Again, you can do your chores or not, but if you don't do your choices or you don't do your chores, then this is going to be the consequence. And so which are you choosing? And a lot of the problems belong to them, not you. Again, focusing on that choice. This happened because you chose to do or not to do this behavior. Having the discussion following these consequences is important, though. We want to help the child understand how their choices resulted in the consequence. Because sometimes, again, the child may not understand, even though we as adults, again, think, you didn't do your chores, you don't get paid. The child may not get that, especially if we don't pay them immediately after they do their chore. So seeing that and having that conversation of maybe when it's payday for the child, if you give them an allowance on Friday, of we're not getting our allowance this week because you chose not to do your chores. Do you understand? And checking in, do you understand why you're not getting your allowance this week? Because if we can get the child to articulate, I'm not getting my allowance because I chose not to do the chore, we're getting them to own the behavior, own the consequence, and also recognize there's a choice for next time. Okay, so we didn't do our chores next week. What can we do differently next week so you get your allowance? It allows the child to problem solve, which is a skill we want to help them develop. So aggressive behaviors fall into a different category. We want to communicate to the child that aggressive behavior is unacceptable and non-negotiable. There's not a situation where being aggressive with a sibling, parent, peer is ever okay. We talked about being firm and consistent throughout. It's even more important when the child is displaying aggressive behavior. The child needs to understand that aggressive responses are not acceptable. This is where we don't want to send those mixed messages of sometimes it's okay to be aggressive. Sometimes I, as a parent, will back away and not enforce the consequence because you're aggressive. That tells the child that sometimes being aggressive is a solution to responding to discipline. Consequences should be very firm for aggression. Again, clearly communicating ongoing, so not when the child becomes aggressive, but before the child's aggressive. If you hit your sibling, if you hit me, maybe in your family if you punch the wall, here's what's going to happen. And not budging from what that consequence is. As we're talking about discipline, though, and being preventative and being proactive, what we want to think about is helping the child find other outlets for their frustration. Because aggression is usually an endpoint. Something is built up over time and has resulted in an explosion. So how can we basically let the steam off before the kettle boils? We may want to help them find physical outlets for that frustration, such as sports, using a punching bag. Can we change the situation? So when I worked with middle schoolers, this is one of the things I always hammered on them. Were you able to leave the situation? Can you walk away? So helping the child recognize they can do a self-imposed timeout. If you feel yourself being frustrated, if you feel like you're going to punch someone, can you walk away? Can you leave the situation? Or you as a parent pulling them out of the situation if you're there. Like, let's take a step away and regroup. Helping the child learn stress reduction techniques, whether they're guided breathing exercises, counting until they're calm. Those are effective methods. And then the last here on my list, but it's probably the most important one, is learning to communicate feelings appropriately instead of through aggression. Encouraging the child to discuss what is upsetting them, what is frustrating them, what is making them sad. Because those emotions are usually what's under anger. Anger is a secondary emotion. I'm angry because I'm sad about something. I'm angry because I'm frustrated, feeling incompetent about something. So how can we communicate before you punch, before you hit something? Maybe as a parent, one of the things you want to look for is, are they balling up their fists? Are they looking tense? So watching for those cues and then asking, what's going on right now for you? What are you feeling right now? And then reinforcing and encouraging them, like, I appreciate you sharing with me that you're frustrated. I appreciate you sharing with me that you're angry. And here's what our next steps are. Working with other caregivers is a challenge because we all kind of have our own philosophy on discipline, rewarding, punishment. So when our message over the past several slides has been consistency, how do we bring that consistency to working with others? This is where our communication skills are important. We want to have clear communication with other caregivers, whether it's a spouse, teacher, grandparent, but clear expectations of what's expected from the child and how to react to inappropriate behavior. I have a young child. I have a 4-year-old who's in preschool, so it's a little different discussion. But I was discussing with his teacher about us using timeouts at home and encouraging them to use timeouts at school so that we're disciplining in the same way. So we're having the same expectations of if you're not listening, if you're not participating, you need to sit in the chair by yourself. You don't get to engage in another activity that you may enjoy. But we want to approach that conversation respectfully and hear what the other person's approach is and what their expectations are. But one of the reasons we want to be consistent among caregivers is children pay more attention than we give them credit for. And if they see caregivers at odds over discipline about what's important, what's not important, they'll begin to split. They'll try to turn the caregivers against each other. Well, mom lets me do this, or dad lets me do that, or when I do this, here's what mom does. And that sets up conflict between the caregivers, which again can exacerbate the child splitting behavior. It's okay to disagree if a form of discipline isn't how you would handle it, but have the discussion not in front of the child. So defer. Let's the discipline. If we walk into the room and we see another person discipline the child, as long as it's within reason, support the discipline and allow the other person who's already administering the discipline to carry it to its conclusion and not intrude. Because then if we intrude, we're going to take the power away from the other caregiver. And again, disempower them in front of the child. So the child may get the message that, oh, okay, mom has more power than dad, so mom's the one I need to listen to, or mom's the one I want to go to if I don't want to get disciplined as harshly. But after the situation, after the child is dealt with, sent off to timeout, on to the next activity, that's when to have the conversation about those expectations. We want to share discipline issues, things I'm seeing at the home, are you seeing at school, or things I'm seeing with me, are you seeing with you? And that can give some insight into the child splitting. The child thinks they can get away with this with dad, but mom says she's not having an issue with it. We want to try to circle the wagon so that child knows the behavior with dad is not okay, and mom's going to support dad and making sure the child gets disciplined in that behavior. We also want to have a similar reward system, and we want to communicate positive behavior. Focusing on the positive is what we can do next instead of failures is really what we want to focus in on discipline at this developmental stage. We want the child to know that we're paying attention to when they do good things and praise or reward that behavior so that they're likely to do it again. Like, okay, I did something good and it was noticed. Because it's very easy to get that habit. And the child gets that mindset of, I did something bad and I got punished. And my parents only notice when I'm doing bad things. So why am I going to try to do good things? That's not noticed, that's not encouraged. So I'm less likely to strive and improve myself. I'm more likely to stay within bounds, but not develop pro-social behaviors. So special considerations when a parent is deployed. which is a unique challenge to the participants on the phone or who are joining us. There's many changes that occur when a parent deploys. And as changes occur, children will lose their sense of competence. Previously, we talked about introducing stability, and even when we are consistent, a parent deploying will create a sense of instability. In that instability, parents may see a regression of previous behaviors they thought the child had overcome. In some ways, this is the child testing to see if the stability still exists. The child wants to see, if I test that boundary that I know exists, will my parents still respond like they always did before? So that's where we get to that comfort, the I want this one, I want structure. And as my world becomes unstable, I may try something to test that that stability is still there. So for the non-deploying parent, there may be an inclination to be softer on the child when the parent deploys, the other parent deploys. Though this may be counterproductive because we're not reestablishing the normalcy the child is seeking. The child may act out more. So, okay, I tried this boundary to find that stability. Mom or dad was nice to me because the other parent is deployed, and so I didn't find that boundary I was expecting to find. So I'm going to try bigger, more inappropriate behavior because I'm looking for that boundary. I'm looking to reestablish that sense of control and stability. Behavior issues may also increase if the deployed parent is seen as a primary disciplinarian. So with the non-deployed parent, the child may test limits to try to renegotiate or find their role in the family in the absence of the deploying family member. So now that the disciplinarian is gone, how do I function in the family? How do I fit in? And so recognizing that, again, this is a child trying to figure out in a new family system where the stability is. And so maintaining those rules and limits stays important. Also, it's important, this is why it's important for parents and caregivers to support each other in front of the child prior to deployment. So the child learns to see the parents as a unified front, and it may make deployment, may make the transition during deployment easier. Both mom and dad have the same expectations for me. Even if mom's more the disciplinarian and she's deploying, I still have a sense of dad. I know that they were a partnership and things won't change that much even with mom deployed. And of course, preparing your child can help. So letting them know if there are going to be any changes. Sometimes the rules do have to change, limits do have to change when one parent deploys. So we can have that joint discussion before the deployment of here's how things are going to change, here's what our expectations are while mom or dad is deployed. This one's, again, forward-facing. We want to lay the groundwork before we need to. And so the same is true in deployment. What groundwork do we need to put in place before a parent deploys so the child knows what's next? Knowing when to seek help. So sometimes, despite our best efforts, we need additional support. So if your child's behavior seems out of control, so we've tried different consequences and nothing seems to be resonating, might be an indication that counseling may be our next step. We may need an outside party to offer a different perspective, work directly with the child, but basically change the system to introduce something if me as a parent has not had success with disciplining and imposing consequences with the child. If you believe the child could be a danger to themselves or others, if you find notes saying, I'm going to shoot the school, or, I don't want to be here anymore, if you find unexplained injuries on the child, such as cutting on the arms, legs, stomach. It's always good to get a second opinion just to make sure the child is safe, because we don't want to ignore warning signs and the worst happen. If we attend to warning signs and they're just struggling with growth, they're just communication of emotions, and we've done an assessment from a professional and confirmed that no harm, no foul, we're no worse off. So if you're hearing the child communicate things or seeing things that concern you, I'd encourage you to go get an assessment, speak with a counselor or psychologist, just to make sure that we can put those concerns to rest. Or attend to them if they're not just concerns. Watching if your child's becoming isolated and withdrawn from friends, this may be indicative of a bigger issue such as depression. Evidence of drug use, if you find paraphernalia, smell it on your child. Again, with this one above it, the isolation, withdrawal from old friends may be indicative of substance use. So the child's hanging out with different friends that you're not familiar with. They may be shifting into a different group where drug use is more acceptable. And always seek help if you think you're at risk for hurting the child. So if you feel so stressed out that you don't think you can effectively discipline without punishing to the point of hurting the child, seek professional help. Because you too want to be proactive. You want to get the help you need before someone is forcing you to get help because you took it a step too far with discipline. So part of not getting to that last step is taking care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. With the military population, as the child is dealing with being unstable due to deployment, so is the spouse who remains behind. You're dealing with having your significant other out of the house on one end, and on the other end, you're trying to maintain being strong for the child, who is also dealing with that uncertainty and probably testing you harder than when your spouse was there. So recognize, the effort you're putting in and the challenge of the situations that face us when we're raising children. Pamper yourself whenever you can. And by pamper, I'm not talking about, $500 massage. Just finding time to yourself to read a book, something. Now, if you can afford the $500 massage, by all means, go get it. But also think about the small things that you can do on a daily basis to recenter yourself. Taking a quiet walk by yourself, finding time to read. Whatever it is that will help you recharge your batteries and be more available to the child. If we don't take care of ourselves, we're more likely to snap and resort to punishment instead of discipline. Because punishment is easier. It's easier to react than to encourage and support the child. You want to give yourself credit for the good job you've done. Parenting is hard, and keeping kids alive until they're 10 or 12 is a win. If you doubt yourself, the kid will pick up on it. You need to feel confident you're doing a good job. And then seek support from others. You're not alone. Even when you feel like you're alone, you're not the first person to have these challenges with your kid. And it's far from weak to seek help and support. It takes a considerable amount of strength to recognize and admit when we need help. So in conclusion, rules and limits provide children with a sense of stability. Effective discipline teaches the child self-control so they can manage themselves when we're not there. Experience the natural and logical consequences of their choices teach the child self-discipline, and that we're not always going to be there to rescue them, that they suffer if they make poor decisions. Special considerations are made when a parent deploys. It's not easy for the spouse or the child, and so both parties should make sure they're taking care of themselves so that they can be available to each other and to the deployed service member. And then seek help if there are concerns about the child's behavior and discipline methods aren't working. again, with that last one, I just want to reiterate, we shouldn't wait too long to seek help. Military OneSource is available to help you, so of course give us a call, and there's several other resources available to you to help if you feel like the child is demonstrating either risk behaviors or being too challenging. All right, with that concludes the presentation for today, but I am going to open the floor for some questions.
Thanks, Tom. We do have some questions that have come in, and I know that we're probably 3 minutes from the top of the hour, but since we started just a few minutes behind, I would like to get to all the questions that have come in. The first question reads, my 10-year-old is starting to act out. My in-laws suggested having him kneel on rice for 15 minutes. To me, that sounds abusive. What is the appropriate discipline for a 10-year-old?
So we talked about the natural and logical consequences, and I can't think of a situation where kneeling on rice would either be a natural or a logical consequence, unless you spilled rice on the floor and you were kneeling down to have to pick it up. So I'd agree, that's probably a shade too far. Without knowing the actual behavior issues you're talking about, it's hard to think about what's the logical or natural consequence for that. But I just go back to what we talked about, time out. Is it taking away some object of value? Maybe even asking the child, this is what you've done. How should I respond to you? But yes, I would stay away from the kneeling on rice because it's discipline, and it will encourage the child to avoid getting punished instead of demonstrating the proactive behavior. So instead of doing what's right, I'm going to avoid doing what's wrong, or just not getting caught, which is that fear you get into when we talk about punishing is, I only get punished if my parents find out, so I just have to be sneakier about what I do, versus the discipline, which is, I want my parents to see me do good things so I can get the positive praise from them.
Okay, thank you. Next question reads, is it easier to prevent behavior by having structure and rules?
Yes, as we talked about in the slides, it's great for both parties, because when you're stressed out, if you have clear structure and rules, you as a parent also know how you need to respond. You're not trying to think of on the fly, this child has driven me nuts and now I need to punish them. You have a fallback on, the child's done this is how I'm going to react. And from the other direction, the child knows, I've done this and I know this is how my parent's going to react. So I would say yes, having structure and rules really helps the child thrive and develop that competency and work to do what's right instead of avoiding what's wrong.
And this question is coming from the person who made the suggestion about what her in-laws and the rice. So are you saying, should the discipline be related to the severity of the infraction?
So to give an example, it should be measured. But again, if we have clear expectations ahead of time, we're not necessarily ramping up. So if I know the child values his phone, if I know that's kind of the end point of, if I take away the phone, the child's going to be compliant because that's what they find most rewarding. The key to good discipline, too, is with the child knowing how you're going to react, is to not actually introduce a consequence. We want the child to know, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. So the child makes a better choice of, okay, I don't want that consequence, so I'm going to act in this way. And yes, I think it's appropriate, depending on the severity, to have an increasing level of consequence. But I want I would want to know in my mind, and I would want the child to know ahead of time, what is that consequence? I don't want it to be a surprise. Because again, I want the child to choose. I don't want to be like, surprise, here's how you're getting, again, punished now because you've done this. I want you to not do this, or I want you to do this because I want you to avoid this consequence. I don't want to have to implement the consequence.
Okay, next question reads, I find myself giving out punishments in anger. What suggestions can you provide that will assist me?
So my question would be, is it around the same situation? If my child does the same thing and I react the same way every time, we need to break that cycle. So again, it's sitting down and establishing the clear consequence so you have something to fall back on when the child misbehaves. So you're not immediately going to anger. You know that if the child does this, this is what the consequence is going to be. It allows for prompting too. You know, we've had the discussion. If you smack your brother again, this is what's going to happen. So now before you go into that other room, I want you to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to carry it out. Because if this happens, here's how I'm going to react. It allows both you and the child to kind of take a step back, calm down, and think about what that next step is. The other piece is that taking care of yourself. Like I said, I have a 4-year-old. Every nerve I have has been poked, even ones I didn't know I had. So I have to make sure I'm taking care of myself and taking breaks so that I'm not responding in anger because I'm stressed out. The child's kind of pushed me to my breaking point. So for you to, when you say I'm frequently responding in anger, I would also say make sure you're taking care of yourself, making sure you have that emotional energy to follow through the consequence, to deal with discipline instead of punishment.
Okay, next question reads, for how long until the behavior change until I return the phony back, or I'm not clear on what they're asking.
So how long before they return the phone? I think they're talking about taking away electronic or taking away a phone.
Oh, the phone. Okay, yes. Okay, they responded yes. You're correct, Tom. That was the question.
So with the previous question, we talked about, do we amp up the discipline in relation to the behavior? So what I might say is, the first time it happens, we take away the phone for an hour. If they don't respond to that, 2 hours. So as the child continues the behavior, we continue maybe extending that length of time. So again, it's a tiered thing. We want the child to be corrective, but they will see if they're not correcting the behavior. It's not the same punishment every time. The punishment is getting progressively or increasing progressively as they continue the behavior. Again, that might be where you find that threshold of, okay, I took it away for a day, and that seemed to be the breaking point of changing the behavior. So I know next time the child demonstrates behavior, we start at a day. If you do this again, we're going to take it away for a day. And so that discipline hangs out there as the standing threshold standard for the behavior. So we don't start back at, okay, it's been 2 days since you did it. We'll start back at taking away for an hour.
Well, at this time, we don't have any further questions that have come into the queue. So I would like to thank Tom Sherman for sharing his invaluable experience and expertise. I would also like to thank our attendees for participating in today's webinar. And if you find yourself having questions after the webinar is over, please email moswebinars@militaryonesource.com, and I'll send the questions over to our presenter and get an answer back to you as soon as we can. This concludes today's webinar on effective discipline for preteens ages 10 to 12. Thank you all for attending, and have a great day.